have additional updates from the mission on recent political developments and on how UNIOGBIS is implementing its mandate and preparing to transition its tasks to the UN country team, UNOWAS, and other partners by the end of this year, as mandated by Security Council Resolution 2512, adopted last February. We will also hear about the impact that COVID-19 is having on socioeconomic development in Guinea-Bissau. As we know, the pandemic is first and foremost a health crisis, but it is also an economic crisis with potentially devastating socioeconomic consequences. To understand how this crisis is affecting Guinea-Bissau, I met virtually with World Bank Country Director and his team recently to discuss how the bank is assisting the country in addressing economic challenges, as well as the COVID-19 pandemic. I will also brief you today on this conversation. First, I would like to welcome our briefers. Ms. Rosine Sohiko Koulibaly, Special Representative of the Secretary General and Head of the United Nations Integrated Peacebuilding Office in Guinea-Bissau, UNIOGBIS. We look forward to hearing her views on the political situation in the country and on the UNIOGBIS transition. We also have the honor to have with us Ambassador Fernando Delfim da Silva, Permanent Representative of Guinea-Bissau to the United Nations. Also, we have with us Permanent Representative of Niger, Ambassador Abdou Abari, who will speak on behalf of ECOWAS. And I'm also pleased to welcome the Assistant Secretary General for Peacebuilding Support, Oscar Fernandez Taranco, who will update us on the activities of the Peacebuilding Fund in Guinea-Bissau. Following the briefings, I will open the floor for member states to discuss the ways and means in which the PBC can provide support to peacebuilding efforts in Guinea-Bissau. Excellencies, last week I had the pleasure of talking to the World Bank's Country Director, Nathan Bellet, and his team working on Guinea-Bissau. We discussed their portfolio of activities in the country, their response to the COVID-19 pandemic, and the economic outlook for Guinea-Bissau. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, the World Bank had an ongoing portfolio that focused on education, increasing access to basic services, expanding economic opportunities, and enhancing resilience, with a view to directly supporting the people of Guinea-Bissau. In February, the bank recognized the impact that COVID-19 would have on lives and livelihoods in Guinea-Bissau. And in light of Guinea-Bissau's continued political impasse, they worked to activate an operational policy that would allow them to work with de facto authorities in order to respond to the COVID-19 threat, as long as those authorities continue to respect prevailing legal agreements. The bank's multi-pronged approach to COVID-19 includes a direct medical response, as well as support to livelihoods and post-COVID recovery needs. To support this, the World Bank mobilized $5 million in rapid support, in addition to some repurposing of its existing portfolio in Guinea-Bissau. The World Bank has been working closely with the government on the medical response, providing medical equipment and supporting the related financial costs, and has recently started work on supporting livelihoods with a focus on agriculture. Planting season for Guinea-Bissau's main export, cashews, has just begun, and farming communities will need additional support for their activities. Excellencies, the socio-economic situation in Guinea-Bissau is dire. The country is witnessing an alarming rate of infection, and recent reports of its toll on health workers in the country is of particular concern. The pandemic's effects on mobility in turn hamper exports, and the 4.5% GDP growth once projected by the World Bank in pre-COVID times could reverse to a contraction of approximately 3%. The bank continues to work closely with the broader humanitarian and development communities, as well as the IMF, on key macroeconomic issues. However, more effective engagement by the international community is needed. It is my hope that after hearing the other briefers today, we can commit, excuse me, we can recommit to providing a platform for bilateral and multilateral partners, including the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, to come together in support of socioeconomic development of Guinea-Bissau. I would like now to turn to our briefers for this morning. Firstly, I would like to invite Ms. Rosine Tsouriko-Libali, Special Representative of the Secretary General and Head of UNIOGBIS, to brief us on the latest political developments, including the electoral process. Ms. Tsouriko-Libali is in Bissau and will join us by video link. You have the floor, Ms. Tsouriko-Libali.
Thank you very much, Excellency. Your Excellency, Ambassador Ronaldo Costa Filho, distinguished members of the Guinea-Bissau country configuration of the Peace Commission, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for another opportunity to brief the Peace Building Commission configuration for Guinea-Bissau. As indicated in my last briefing to you in February, the PBC remains an important platform to support and accompany Guinea-Bissau to return to a stable and sustainable development course. As you know, this advances towards its closure by the 31st of December this year. The Commission's catalytic role to help advocate and support the urgent reforms for sustainable peace in Guinea-Bissau cannot be overemphasized. As you recall, Bissau Guineans held peaceful legislative and presidential elections in 2019, of which the latter ended in a dispute before the Supreme Court of Justice. As the decision of the court was pending, there was a self-investiture on the 27th of February of Umaro Sissoco Embalo as President of the Republic, in contravention of the country's constitution and legal framework. He subsequently dismissed the sitting Prime Minister Aristide Gomes, replacing him with Nuno Nabia, who formed his government and took over the reins of governance. These events drew wide criticism, both nationally and internationally, and it resulted in heightened political tensions and insecurity. In the wake of the COVID-19 outbreak, the de facto authorities consolidated their hold onto power by taking critical decisions, including the closure of the country's national borders and airspace on the 18th March, and imposition of a state of emergency on the 17th of March that has been extended times presently until the 25th of June. Meanwhile, the People's National Assembly has been paralyzed due to contesting claims over which political coalition controls the majority, thus impeding the holding of Parliament's November and February sessions. Mr. Chairman, Excellencies, the decision of the ECOWAS Authority of Heads of State and Government of the 22nd of April recognized Umaro Sissoco Embalo as the winner of the presidential election and requested him to appoint a prime minister and form a new government by the 22nd of May. Moreover, ECOWAS stressed the need for immediate steps to initiate a constitutional reform subject to a referendum within 6 months to ensure political stability in the country. In line with ECOWAS' decision, Embalo initiated constitutional represented in Parliament. However, as their positions were deeply entrenched, no consensus was reached, and President Embalo requested the President of the National Assembly, Cipriano Kasama, to mediate amongst the parties and report by the 18th of June. Embalo has repeatedly indicated his intention to dissolve Parliament should the parties fail to reach an agreement on the appointment of a prime minister and formation of a government. Following unsuccessful consultations with political parties, civil society organizations, and religious leaders, Kasama announced that a plenary session of the National Assembly would be held starting on the 29th of June to establish which political coalition, namely PAGC or MADEM J15, holds the majority in parliament, thus qualifying it to lead and form a government. Considering that the meeting of the National Assembly and the clarification of the current majority could represent a breakthrough, the risk of spoilers creating distractions cannot be discarded. Moreover, regardless of the ANP session's outcome, the risk remains that the president may decide to dismiss parliament. Meanwhile, ahead of ANP session, the controversial detention and arrest of political figures in the country is heightening tensions and worsening the political scenario. Civil society and human rights organizations are reporting an atmosphere of fear and intimidation that goes in the opposite direction of constructive peace and dialogue. Mr. Chairman, Excellencies, as you may see, the political environment in the country remains fluid and deeply polarized. Faced with the outbreak of COVID-19 and its accompanying movement restrictions, coupled by the absence of a legitimate government to engage with, the efforts by the UN and other members of the international community in Bissau have been extremely challenged. In terms of UN's response to the COVID-19 outbreak, and for a limited time, and for exceptional humanitarian reasons, my deputy, in his capacity as a UN resident coordinator, joined by the WHO and World Bank representatives, engaged the de facto government to support national efforts to fight the pandemic. In this regard, a framework to coordinate the support by the international community was agreed upon, and pledges were made to the National Health Response Plan, as well as support provided to mitigate the socio-economic impact of the pandemic. The most recent information available indicates that out of the 5,147 tests made in the country, 1,556 persons tested positive for COVID-19, with 19 deaths so far. A total of 191 persons have recovered. UN staff in the country are telecommuting and with the severe movement restrictions. Beyond the impact of the pandemic, the institutional crisis has imposed direct challenges on the implementation of UNOCB's mandate, including support for political dialogue and facilitating urgent reforms, notably the constitutional review, as well as the fight against drug trafficking and transnational organized crime, whose recent gains cannot be lost. The mission has been limited to directly engaging with national partners at the technical level until a new prime minister is appointed and a government is formed. The situation has also impacted, as you can imagine, the UN's transition planning process in the absence of legitimate national counterparts to engage with to ensure national ownership and buy-in of the transition and drawdown processes. Efforts made with the former government produced limited results. It is therefore imperative that a prime minister be appointed and a new government be formed with utmost urgency to national consultations, with only 6 months left until the closure of UNOCBIS. Meanwhile, the mission continues to coordinate with the international community, including with the Group of Five, and particularly ECOWAS, appealing for calm and constructive dialogue to prevent a further deterioration of the situation and deepening institutional crisis, UNOGBIS also continues to support civil society organizations' engagement to inform political leaders the need to focus on the long-term national interest for the stability of the country and move beyond narrow partisan goals. Mr. Chairman, Excellencies, projections beyond the current impasse call for a sustained collective engagement by the international community. In this regard, the role of the Peacebuilding Commission remains critical in ensuring the implementation of key reforms, such as the constitutional review, the electoral law, and the political parties law, which, considering the current situation, are unlikely to be concluded before the mission's departure. The attention and focus of regional and international partners would therefore be needed to sustain advocacy and catalyze support towards ensuring the implementation of these core peace-building priorities. It is worth mentioning that on the 11th of May, President Ambalo established a technical commission to prepare a framework on the constitutional reform, which triggered negative reactions in the country over its legality and the usurpation of the prerogatives of the National Assembly. The core peace-building priorities also include sustaining recent gains made in combating organized crime and supporting the mainstreaming of gender equality concerns and participation and representation of women in all peace-building processes. Hence, PBC support to the country's fight against drug trafficking and transnational organized crime, empowerment of women and gender mainstreaming remains crucial. Other reforms called for by the ECOWAS roadmap and the Conakry Agreement of 2016 include reforming the defense, security, and justice sectors. However, this can only be undertaken should there be political will and readiness. Chairman, Excellencies, the deep political divisions, including within Parliament, poses a serious threat to stability. All political forces should be encouraged to commit to constructive political dialogue and reach consensus on important national priorities around the reform agenda, sustainable peace and reconciliation. Your bilateral and collective engagement in that regard would be welcome. Although the reconfiguration of the UN presence in Guinea-Bissau constitutes a window of opportunity for renewal efforts, national stakeholders must put differences aside and agree on a common agenda for sustainable peace and development in the country. In this connection, the resolution of the current political crisis and institutional impasse is paramount ahead of the establishment of a high-level platform for relevant actors to discuss, promote, and accompany the country in its reform agenda, as well as inform on progress made in the UN's transition. Moreover, despite the political impasse, promoting inclusive and sustainable socio-economic development remains crucial. The upcoming UN Sustainable Development Cooperation Framework provides an appropriate platform for continuing our efforts and support to the country, and I appeal to the international community to generously fund it. Mr. Chairman, Excellencies, finally, I would like to once more express my gratitude to the Commission for its political and financial support through the PBF and to the UN efforts and delays caused by political and institutional instability. As UNOGBIS advances towards its closure, I wish to re-emphasize the need for the PBC to maintain Guinea-Bissau high on its agenda. The country and the people of Guinea-Bissau need your support in these difficult times to consolidate the gains and be propelled towards sustainable peace, stability, and development. Thank you for your attention.
I thank the SRSG for her sobering remarks. I now invite the permanent representative of Guinea-Bissau to the United Nations, Ambassador Fernando Delfim da Silva, to present his remarks. Ambassador, you are still muted.
Monsieur le Président, chers collègues, ambassadeur Ronaldo Costa Filho, je vous remercie d'avoir convoqué cette réunion de la configuration Guinée-Bissau, malgré le contexte particulier dans lequel nous vivons tous, lié à la pandémie du Covid-19. La convocation de cette réunion dans le contexte que je viens d'évoquer, ainsi que la participation des membres de la configuration, est la parfaite illustration de votre engagement à la tête de notre configuration, mais aussi de l'intérêt que portent ses membres à la Guinée-Bissau. Je voudrais au même titre saluer les interventions de Madame Rosine Sori Coulibaly, représentante spéciale du secrétaire général des Nations Unies en Guinée-Bissau. Cette session de la configuration Guinée-Bissau se tient dans un moment particulièrement difficile pour la Guinée-Bissau, qui se bat comme elle peut avec la pandémie du Covid-19. Je voudrais d'ailleurs profiter de cette occasion pour remercier les pays frères et les organisations que nous soutenons dans ce combat. Qu'il me soit également permis d'exprimer l'appréciation de mon pays à la contribution du Fonds pour la consolidation de la paix, PBF, dans la mise en œuvre d'importants projets en Guinée-Bissau, notamment ceux visant la participation des femmes et jeunes dans la vie économique et sociopolitique du pays, particulièrement pendant la période électorale, mais aussi pendant cette phase de la pandémie du Covid-19 que nous traversons. Monsieur le Président, les institutions de mon pays sont engagées dans la recherche des solutions politiques internes en vue de mettre en œuvre les recommandations de la CEDEAO contenues dans son communiqué du 22 avril 2020, notamment la mise en place d'un gouvernement nouveau qui reflète les résultats des élections législatives de mars 2019, conformément aux dispositions de la Constitution qui permettent à la Guinée-Bissau de concentrer tous les efforts à faire face aux conséquences économiques et humanitaires du Covid-19. Avec la reprise de la session ordinaire de l'Assemblée nationale populaire, le 29 juin prochain, les partis politiques y représentés pourront certainement clarifier qui détient la majorité absolue à travers leurs coalitions respectives. Cela permettra au président de la République de procéder en conformité avec les délibérations de l'Assemblée nationale populaire et nommer un nouveau gouvernement en conséquence. Toujours dans le souci de respecter les recommandations de la CEDEAO, le président de la République a mis en place le 12 mai une commission technique composée de 5 experts nationaux chargés de rédiger, dans un délai de 90 jours, un projet de constitution qui sera soumis à l'appréciation de l'Assemblée nationale populaire. Pour conclure, Monsieur le Président et chers collègues, je voudrais vous informer que ma mission en tant que représentant permanent de la Guinée-Bissau auprès des Nations Unies est à son terme. Et je voudrais saisir cette opportunité singulière pour vous exprimer mes remerciements les plus sincères pour vos collaborations respectives et solidarité vis-à-vis de mon pays, la Guinée-Bissau. Je vous remercie.
I thank the distinguished Ambassador of Guinea-Bissau, Ambassador Fernando Delfim da Silva, for his encouraging remarks. Just to inform all members of the meeting that a copy in English of the Ambassador's statement has been posted in the chat function of the group, should you so wish. Let me just say that we are sorry to hear, Ambassador, that you are leaving us soon. We shall miss you here and wish you success in your future endeavors. With this now, I would like to turn and give the floor to the permanent representative of Niger to the United Nations, Ambassador Abdou Abari, to present his remarks on the role played by ECOWAS in Guinea-Bissau. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Mr. Chair, dear colleagues, allow me at the outset to commend your sustained commitment towards stabilizing Guinea-Bissau in your role as chair of the Guinea-Bissau configuration of the Peace-Building Commission. I would also like to thank the special representative of the Secretary General in Guinea-Bissau, Rosine Sori Koulibaly, for her briefing, as well as her tireless efforts and good offices to help restoring peace in this country. The political situation in Guinea-Bissau since the announcement of the result of the second round of presidential election in December 2019 is, to say the least, at a critical juncture. That is why ECOWAS, which Niger has the honor of chairing at the moment, remains fully mobilized to resolve the political crisis afflicting the country. Indeed, in the face of the persistent post-electoral crisis inherent to the misunderstandings between the National Electoral Commission and the Supreme Court on the one hand, and the Constitutional Court on the other, and after an in-depth analysis of the political situation, the authority of head of state and government of ECOWAS decided to recognize the victory of Umaru Sissoco Embalo, so a communique of its commission issued at the end of the summit held by video conference on 22nd April 2020. The communique had requested President of Guinea-Bissau, in particular on points 7 and 8 respectively, to appoint a prime minister and a new government no later than 22nd of May 2020, in accordance with the provisions of the Constitution, and to immediately initiate the reform process relating to the adoption of a new constitution to be submitted to a referendum in 6 months in order to ensure the stability of the country. To this end, the recent establishment of Constitutional Review Commission comprised an experienced Bissau Guinean jurist is an encouraging step taken by the authorities. Mr. Chair, on 14 and 15 May 2020, the President of Guinea-Bissau, Umaru Sissoco Embalo, informed the current chairman of ECOWAS, His Excellency Mr. Issoufou Mahamadou, President of the Republic of Niger, that he had initiated a new process of national dialogue with all the dynamic forces of the nation, including the political parties represented in the parliament and the state institutions, as well as civil society, who partook and welcomed the initiative. He also informed the chairman of ECOWAS of a series of consultations undertaken with a view to the appointment of a prime minister and the formation of a new government in accordance with the ECOWAS communique. Following these consultations, President Embalo concluded that the only viable solution to overcome the deep political instability that has plagued Guinea-Bissau for more than 20 years is the creation of a government of national unity that reflects the current configuration of the parliament. However, in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic, whose infection rate has soared, with the Prime Minister as well as several members of the government testing positive, the President Ambalo considered that this context made it difficult to continue the dialogue. He had therefore requested ECOWAS to extend the deadline of 22nd May 2020 for the appointment of a Prime Minister and the establishment of a new government. In that regard, we encourage the Bissau-Guinean authorities, who bear the primary responsibility for ensuring the security of its people, as well as all political actors and state institutions, to work together to mitigate that threat at this critical time. Mr. Chair, in conclusion, we welcome the progress made in the fight against drug trafficking in Guinea-Bissau, as illustrated by the significant seizures of March and September 2019, and the convicted of those involved. In that regard, the authorities of Guinea-Bissau should be encouraged to further take concrete measures to ensure peace, security, and stability in the country. On the other hand, it should be recalled that the defense and security forces of Guinea-Bissau have so far remained impartial and continue to provide security for the country's institutions. We encourage them to continue refraining from any interference in the ongoing political process in the country. We welcome the positive impact of the ECOWAS mission in Guinea-Bissau, ECOMIB, on peace and stability in the country. The chairman of ECOWAS authority and his peers remain committed to the search for a lasting solution to the political and institutional crisis in Guinea-Bissau. On behalf of the ECOWAS, I would like here to express our gratitude to the Guinea-Bissau configuration of the Peacebuilding Commission for its actions in support of the effort of Guinea-Bissau and those of ECOWAS. As you know, the holding of elections alone cannot resolve the difficulties facing the country. Therefore, we call on the Peacebuilding Commission to use its donor mobilization capacity in support to national initiatives within the context of peacebuilding, particularly in the area of socio-economic development, including food security and rural development. The strengthening and modernization of democratic institutions, as well as the judiciary sector, are areas where substantial support could be provided. In the same vein, Guinea-Bissau's bilateral and multilateral partners should also contribute to the implementation of the Conakry Agreement and the ECOWAS roadmap. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Abdou Abari, for your statement. I now have the pleasure to welcome Assistant Secretary General Oscar Fernandez Taranco and invite him to give his remarks on the activities of the Peacebuilding Fund in Guinea-Bissau.
Yes, thank you very much, Ambassador Ronaldo Costa Filho, Chair of the Guinea-Bissau Confederation, and good morning, Excellencies, dear colleagues and friends. Let me start by thanking you for convening this meeting, which has provided again an opportunity to bring the Commission up to speed on the very complicated and evolving situation in Guinea-Bissau. Also, let me use this opportunity to thank our good friend, the SRSG, Sori Coulibaly, for her update on the latest development and her dynamic leadership on the ground. Merci, Rosina. And for the brief by Ambassador Abari, who is representing Niger, both as a member of the Security Council and chair of ECOWAS. The ECOWAS UN partnership on Guinea-Bissau is a strong one, and I am confident that it will be brought to bear in resolving the current political stalemate in coordination with other P5 members on the ground. I also welcome the chair's recent engagement with the World Bank, noting that we cannot lose sight of securing longer-term peace-building priorities and socioeconomic development gains, even as the medical response to COVID-19 crisis takes immediate precedence. This is even more urgent with the transition underway as Union Peace prepares to draw down by the end of this year. The Peacebuilding Commission is providing an important platform and creating the space for strategic discussions and stronger partnerships between the UN and the international financial institutions, including the World Bank, to better support the transition phase. The Peacebuilding Commission is the ideal venue to bring to the table the lessons learned from previous transitions, including those of Liberia, Sierra Leone, and to serve as a platform of solidarity, sustained political attention and support to the key peace-building priorities and resourcing gaps that the country is facing in order to ensure that the fragile gains are not lost. The situation in Guinea-Bissau is on the agenda of the Secretary General's Executive Committee this very week, and it was discussed yesterday at the Deputies Committee. An emphasis in that meeting was placed on the importance of this important body, the Peacebuilding Commission, because of its engagement with the multiple stakeholders and to help surmount, of course, the current political impasse and set the country on a better footing to build back better in the aftermath of the pandemic, including by serving as a platform for sustained support. In terms of the Peacebuilding Fund and COVID-19, recognizing the challenges and that the political stalemate poses on top of COVID-19, the Peacebuilding Fund projects are readjusting to the pandemic to include reorienting some activities from existing projects to respond to the new tension triggers created by COVID-19 pandemic and to empower youth and women groups to lead in peaceful sensitization and effective community responses. For example, after consultation with the mission, we quickly reoriented one of our existing projects to enable UN partners to work with journalists and media outlets, including social media, establish and maintain an online fact-checking platform to prevent the spread of fake news and misinformation about COVID-19 pandemic and its response. The Peacebuilding Fund is currently supporting two major peacebuilding transition projects. The first project, which was approved in December of 2019, focuses on helping the UN and the government to fight drug trafficking and transnational crime through capacity support to key institutions, as well as through a greater focus on communities and their role in prevention. The second project, which was just approved in January of this year, is a continuation of an existing Peacebuilding Fund project to promote inclusive political dialogue and focuses on supporting a coordinated approach between the United Nations, ECOWAS, and the civil society partners. As Ambassador Ambari just mentioned, the importance of this partnership, supporting the development of systemic reforms, legislative, electoral, and judicial that emanated from the Conakry Agreement. It's also supporting the capacity of women and youth to engage as leaders and advocates in dialogue and reform. So we hope that this project can help strategically unlock the political deadlock and incentivize the country's leadership to make progress in the interest of the people. While program implementation may be slowed by the COVID-19 situation, our hope is that the mission and partners can use these projects to promote inclusivity and empower youth and women groups in the face of the pandemic, with a greater push towards dialogue and transparency in institutional reforms and the fight against drugs, and as an opportunity to stabilize the political situation through bottom-up approaches. We also hope that these projects will support the transfer of technical knowledge and political know-how before the mission withdraws in support of a coherent transition in terms of UN support for Guinea-Bissau. We are working very closely with the SRSG, the DSRSG, and resident coordinator, the country team, and partners on the ground to support additional interventions in peace building and transitions that might be approved later this year, including on human rights, security sector reform, and women and youth participation, as long as there are political windows of opportunity for support and filling in strategic gaps, again, to ensure that the hard-won gains are not eroded. So with this, Mr. Chair, I thank you again for this opportunity to brief the Peace Building Commission. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ASG, Mr. Fernando Staranco, for this briefing and for the important information brought to us on the current portfolio of the PBF in Guinea-Bissau. Now I will open the floor for members to weigh in, as usual practice in our virtual world. A request for the floor can be made through the chat function of this Zoom platform, and I shall wait for interested parties to indicate their interest. I see permanent representative of Morocco, Omar Hilal, who is requesting the floor. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for convening this very important meeting of the Guinea-Bissau configuration. And special thanks also to our speakers for their anticipated briefings about the current situation in the brotherly country of Guinea-Bissau. In light of the briefings we heard today, we can agree that Guinea-Bissau stands today in very crucial transition phases of its peace building and sustaining peace process. One, after the legislative and presidential elections, and two, in between the drawdown of unique peace scheduled December 2020, and three, in the course of the COVID-19 related global crisis. I wish therefore to make the three following points. One, Guinea-Bissau has deployed significant and continuous efforts in the implementation of the Conakry Agreement and to carry out its electoral cycle, which concluded last December with the election of His Excellency Mr. Omaro Sissoko Embalo as President of the Republic. I wish just to congratulate the people and government of Guinea-Bissau on the completion of their electoral cycle and on the peaceful conduct of this year, very important political, democratic, and peace-building milestone. The international community has to remain engaged and continue lending its support where needed and required by Guinea-Bissau in full respect of the national sovereignty, territorial integrity, political independence, and national ownership of this country. Two, this is all the more necessary as Guinea-Bissau's peace-building process has to deal with several issues, including the upcoming drawdown of unique peace and the gradual transfer of the missions task to the UN country team, the UN Office for West Africa, and the Sahel, UNWAS, and other partners. Indeed, in over 20 years of presence, the mission has staunchly supported national peace-building priorities and contributed to reform in the areas of defense and security, justice, rule of law, gender equality, and promotion of national reconciliation. We have to think to make sure that this decade-long gains are safeguarded and further consolidated to build suitable ambitions for a smooth, sustainable development, particularly in this uniquely challenging times. The PBC is the unique platform that can bring a coherent and coordinated support to national Bissau Guinea effort during the transition process and beyond, and mobilize partners and resources to address demanding challenges. I wish to refer to the role our Commission has played with Liberia, who has come to be regarded as a real success story. Also, a word of recognition for the tremendous work done by Brazil and at the head of the Guinea-Bissau configuration. Three, and finally, and to conclude with the very regrettable and adverse effects of the COVID-19 on the peace building and sustaining peace effort in Guinea-Bissau. I wish to call on PBC and the international community to reinforce its assistance in the fight against this global scourge and to prevent the latter from hampering or reversing decade-long peace-building gains. With this same concept His Majesty King Mohammed VI of Morocco gave his royal instruction to send essential medical aid and equipment to support Guinea-Bissau in its fight against the coronavirus. This help arrived in Bissau last Friday and comes as part of the historical and brotherly bilateral relations, as well as within the framework of the Royal Action-Oriented Initiative launched on 13 April 2020, aiming to enable the sharing of experiences and good practices and establish an operational framework and South-South cooperation in order to support African countries' effort in the various phases of the management of the pandemic. My country remains committed to accompanying Guinea-Bissau in its effort to consolidate peace, democracy, and socio-economic development, whether through the PBC or on the bilateral level. And we call on the PBC and PBF to increase their support to Guinea-Bissau in these difficult times. We also welcome the important role of the Group of Five in Bissau, ECOWAS, European Union, UN, African Union, and the Community of Portuguese Language Countries, CPLP, in fostering dialogue and conciliation and promoting stability in this country. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
I thank the distinguished permanent representative of Morocco for his statement and take note in particular of Morocco's provision of humanitarian assistance in the medical field to Guinea-Bissau. This is a very welcome information. I now give the floor to the permanent representative of Kenya, Ambassador Lazarus Amaya.
Chair, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, may I begin by thanking you, Chair, for convening this important meeting, and also thank the briefers for the useful updates we have received. My concern or question regarding support for the configuration has been largely addressed, and so may I simply commend the PR, Silva and Maria and Guinea-Bissau for their continued engagement with the PBC in partnership with Brazil, the configuration chair, and note that it is through hearing specific experiences from various countries that the Commission and the Peace Building Fund can find useful entry points to support the national priorities, in this case of Guinea-Bissau. We wish our brothers and sisters in Guinea-Bissau the best in their quest with support of ECOWAS, AU, and the UN for sustainable peace and sustainable development. I thank you once again, Chair and distinguished members.
I thank the distinguished permanent representative of Kenya for his statement. Now I give the floor to the distinguished permanent representative of Slovakia, Ambassador Michal Mlejnar.
Thank you very much, Chair, dear Ambassador Ronaldo Costa, Chair of the country-specific configuration. Thank you very much for convening us, unfortunately still not around the same table, but on the same screen. It's great to see all colleagues, and especially it was great to get the briefings by Madame SRSG, Ambassadors Abari, Silva, and our dear friend ASG Taranko. Indeed, the PBC remains a unique and highly useful platform for us to be able to address the ongoing challenges related with the work of UNIOCBIS and the situation in Guinea-Bissau. In fact, really hoping that we can see peaceful and timely resolution of the current political impasse as regards the appointment of the next Prime Minister, which, as we have heard also from Madame SRSG, is so much expected also in the context of the necessary structural reforms that needs to follow, or as ASG, put it in the context of filling in the strategic gaps and consolidating the hard-won gains that have been achieved. In the same vein, we certainly hope that the country will also be able to cope with the challenges presented to all of us without exception in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. We see that no one is immune, and it hits everybody, and it often hits the more vulnerable, most vulnerable, even worse. So we certainly hope that as the country continues dealing with the COVID-19 situation, it will be also able to go back to addressing the political context and the structural reforms. I would like to highlight 2 or 3 elements regarding especially the context of the rule of law and the security sector, because certainly security sector reform remains at the heart of the long-term progress and success that we can achieve. As already the 2006 strategy paper on restructuring and modernization of the defense and security sector put it, it was then revised in 2016, of course, in close cooperation with the African Union, ECOWAS, and the European Union as well. This is part of the national vision and remains the basis for advancing critical, politically sensitive reforms, which include right-sizing of the security sector, including through the retirement and pension schemes as outlined in the World Bank Public Expenditure Review, devising legislation to regulate law enforcement activities, and clarifying the status of former freedom fighters, setting forth a donor government coordination structure, just to mention some of the most important elements. So certainly in the upcoming period, as we are able to address the COVID-19 and the political impasse, we would like to encourage the future government and also all the partners of Guinea-Bissau to continue supporting the comprehensive security sector reform process in conjunction with the political reform agenda, which really are an important component of the inclusive dialogue that has been going on. In fact, we have to remind ourselves that the security sector, if again under addressed or under appreciated, so to say, can potentially be another complicating factor rather than a positive contribution to further stabilization. So we need to see the situation in the security sector in 2 contexts. In the positive one, hopefully, as it can really contribute greatly to stabilization efforts, but potentially also as another destabilizing factor. As co-chair of the group of friends of SSR, we remain fully engaged and we continue paying a lot of attention to developments in this particular field, and we are committed to working together with you, Mr. Chair, with other partners within the PBC context, and of course, and in particular with the President and the future government in this particular context. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank the distinguished permanent representative of Slovakia for his statement, which I take as a renewed commitment not only to this configuration but to the PBC in general, which is a very welcome presentation. I now have the pleasure of giving the floor to the distinguished permanent representative of Portugal, Ambassador Francisco Lopes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And also thank you to our briefers today, SRSG Sori Coulibaly, Ambassador Fernando Delfim da Silva, to whom I wish all the best, Ambassador Abdul Abarri, and ASG Oscar Fernandez Taranco. Allow me to take this opportunity at the outset, Mr. Chairman, to single out our most sincere gratitude towards the personal commitment of the Special Representative Rosine Sori Coulibaly, supported by UNIOGBIS, in promoting the coordination between the UN system, the international partners, and the authorities of Guinea-Bissau. Mr. Chairman, as today's briefings highlighted, the post-electoral period brought about, again, significant political challenges to Guinea-Bissau. We urge all political and institutional actors to engage in a constructive political dialogue with a view to enable the nomination of a new government in accordance with the Constitution, in conformity with the results of the legislative elections of March 2019, and in line with the recommendations put forward by ECOWAS on the 22nd of April. The comprehensive respect for the rule of law remains paramount. We encourage UNIOGBIS and the SRSG to continue working closely with the P5 in support of ECOWAS mediation efforts. As we noted in the last meeting of this configuration, the transition and prospective closure of UNIOGBIS will take place amidst a scenario still fraught with obstacles to Guinea-Bissau's political stability, public security, and socio-economic development. The prevailing circumstances make it difficult to anchor the transition planning efforts in national ownership, a situation further compounded by the challenges posed by the pandemic of COVID-19. The ongoing reduction of UNIOGBIS mandate, particularly regarding the support to justice and security sectors reform and institutional capacity building, has concrete impacts on the fragile institutional reality of Guinea-Bissau. The transition period will find Guinea-Bissau in a difficult situation in what concerns the competition for resources and support globally. We therefore believe that we need to witness determined action in three areas. First and foremost, genuine progress in the political process with the formation of a new government as a priority. Secondly, we must monitor closely the transition process while seeking to explore ways to foster the national participation from Guinea-Bissau authorities and other stakeholders. Finally, and directly linked with the previous point, we need to start a kind of marketing of the transition. We urgently need a guiding document as to the future peace-building priorities in Guinea-Bissau, at the national level and at the United Nations level. The ongoing work towards the elaboration of a common country analysis and the future sustainable development cooperation framework may be a good opportunity to start involving the international partners. Areas such as security sector reform, institutional capacity building, gender and women empowerment, youth, climate change, health and education seem to be priorities. We hope that this configuration will work closely with the SRSG and the Secretariat so that we can all join efforts to avoid, as much as possible, the financial cliff in the transition period. In concluding, Mr. Chairman, I reiterate Portugal's willingness to work alongside the Guinea-Bissau authorities and the country's civil society. Our objective is the development and the well-being of the people of Guinea-Bissau in a stable and peaceful political environment. We remain firmly committed to maintaining our development partnership, primarily focusing on areas such as health, education, good governance, and rule of law, as well as justice and agriculture. Alongside our effort to redirect some of our bilateral cooperation towards the health emergency, Portugal has also contributed to the multilateral response, namely with earmarked contributions to the action of WHO, UNICEF, and the ICRC. I thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank the distinguished ambassador from Portugal, Francisco Lopes, for his statement and for the useful ideas on the way ahead. I thank you for that. And now I give the floor to the distinguished Deputy Permanent Representative of Angola, João Gimoliaca.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I would like to express our thanks for convening this important meeting to share our views on the UN efforts and the situation in Guinea-Bissau. The situation in Guinea-Bissau is indeed worrying for all of us and deserves our full attention and international support. Angola is in favor of international initiatives that promote peace and stability in Guinea-Bissau. This period that the country is going through, coupled with the impact of COVID-19, international engagement remains critical to assist the country's authorities in the National Health Response Emergency Plan and address the socio-economic impact of the pandemic. We acknowledge the commitment of the United Nations teams in Guinea-Bissau, who, in coordination with local authorities, have worked hard to prevent and to combat the spread of the virus in the country. Mr. Chair, the stability and security in Guinea-Bissau are still of concern. According to the Security Council Resolution 2512/2020, the UN foresees the end of the mandate of the Integrated Peace Building Office in Guinea-Bissau by 31st December, and a withdrawal from the mission would be faced. It is important that this exercise be carried out in close coordination with the national authorities in order to maintain the main peace-building priorities, consolidate the gains achieved so far, diffuse growing tension, and move toward a sustainable peace. ECOWAS would play an important role in this period in order to ensure the process of social and cultural economic development in the country in a peaceful manner. The responsibility of the PBC in supporting peace building effort in Guinea-Bissau remains critical. However, it is necessary to maintain this support with the UN teams to implement the urgent reforms outlined in the Conakry Agreement to sustain the gains made in the fights against drug trafficking and transnational crime, and to promote the role of women in political and peace-building process. Finally, Mr. Chair, we would like to underline the communique of 24th April of the Community of Portuguese-speaking countries, urging all political and institutional actors to make their contribution so that through dialogue, Guinea-Bissau achieves and consolidate the stability, peace, and development desired by all of us. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank the distinguished Deputy Permanent Representative of Angola for his statement. And now I give the floor to the distinguished Deputy Permanent Representative of Ireland, Ambassador Brian Flynn. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, briefers. Chair, a lot has happened since we last met in February, but clearly there are still many, many very serious challenges facing Guinea-Bissau. I think, as others have said, we're at what you could call a critical moment of transition. And we join others in encouraging all to engage constructively in navigating a way forward. Ireland is committed to continuing to work with you, Chair, in this configuration, but also with our colleagues from Guinea-Bissau to seek an effective and lasting solution to the current political situation, but also to work to help Guinea-Bissau weather the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. Regional partners continue to play a very important role. In particular, I pay tribute to the leading role of ECOWAS, as well as the continued engagement of the Group of Five. This again underlines the really critical role that regional actors can play. Very good to hear today from the SRSG, who's doing such important work. I listened very carefully to what you said, SRSG, and to the proposals you made, including, I think, what was an important idea about establishing a platform to coordinate international assistance. We often speak here at the PBC about how critical partnerships are in building lasting peace, and the critical role partners play, particularly when they act in a coherent and coordinated manner that best serves people on the ground. This is also the case when it comes to responding to the COVID outbreak. The crisis needs an effective and integrated response. We all need to work together and ensure, in particular, that we're reaching those most vulnerable. Chair, you spoke about your visit to the World Bank and the need for the international community to do more. I think it's a question we need to reflect on here within the PBC. What more can the PBC do to support efforts to mitigate the socio-economic impact of the pandemic in Guinea-Bissau and elsewhere? Also, very good to hear this morning from Oscar. As a strong supporter of the Peace Building Fund, we see great value in the focus the PBF has placed on projects in Guinea-Bissau which support bottom-up approaches, which work to strengthen the capacity of civil society and local partners and encourage and help foster inclusive dialogue in institutions. Very much welcome also, Oscar, the reorientation that you spoke about. It's exactly the type of way that we all want to see the PBF work on the ground, and the way it does this kind of responsive approach. So that's very welcome. And your work on supporting women and youth empowerment in political processes is particularly important. So once again, just to thank you all the briefers, to our colleagues in Guinea-Bissau, to assure you that we stand with you and will be supporting you. And I suppose as a final point, to repeat the call of the SRSG that we all need to keep Guinea-Bissau very high on our agenda. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much to the distinguished Deputy Permanent Representative of Ireland, Ambassador Brian Flynn. And now I give the floor to the representative of Japan, Ambassador Namatsuhiro Yuki.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I thank all the briefers for their informative and insightful presentations. I'm going to get straight to the point. We need to continue to encourage institutional reforms in Guinea-Bissau. Political stability would be a powerful driving force for sustaining peace. Throughout the years of the PBC's engagement with Guinea-Bissau, we have consistently emphasized the need to address the causes of the repeated political stalemate. We should continue to promote the necessary institutional reforms with an appropriate division of executive, legislative, and judicial powers to prevent recurring deadlocks. Implementing the reforms outlined in the Conakry Agreement and ECOWAS roadmap, including the institutional reform that Ambassador Abari and others mentioned, is a stepping stone to the robust development and economic growth that the people of Guinea-Bissau long for. What is more, the problems associated with the state institutions are certainly not the right medication for dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. Without implementing the urgent institutional reforms envisaged in the Conakry Agreement, it will be difficult to strengthen the national health system to meet the needs of the population. We took note of the challenges UNIOG-BIS faces in delivering the critical mandated tasks of providing technical support to the authority in expediting the review of the Constitution. We strongly hope that the UN's technical support to the Parliamentary Ad Hoc Commission yields results. We also recognize the critical role of the PBF here in assisting UNIOG-BIS in the delivery of its mandate on constitutional reform. We believe this PBF support helps UNIOG-BIS's overall transition plan in preparation to transfer residual peace-building priorities to the UN country team. Japan will do its part to support the peace-building efforts in Guinea-Bissau. We supported the electoral process last year through UNDP, and this year we provided $2.8 million to the National School Food Program for 180,000 school children. Before closing, I would like to give special thanks to DPPA for providing PBC members with a detailed update note on the political situation in Guinea-Bissau. I'm not sure, but this may have been the first time in recent years for the PBC to receive such an informative note from DPPA. This certainly helps us to continue to engage in the peace-building efforts in a more effective way. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Namazu. I now give the floor to the Deputy Permanent Representative of Bangladesh, Mr. Tarek Islam.
Thank you, Excellency. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Excellency. First of all, I'd like to thank Brazil for convening us today, and we also thank all the briefers for their useful briefing. We appreciate the ECOWAS for their lead and continued engagement with the Guinea-Bissau authorities, and we particularly appreciate Brazil, the chair of the Guinea-Bissau Confederation, for their continued efforts. The situation, as shared by the briefers, remains grave. So, as rightly pointed out by many of the previous speakers, inclusive dialogue, constitutional and institutional reform, security sector reform, socio-economic development, addressing resource gaps. These are the areas where improvement can bring the country to the path to sustainable development. In this regard, we feel that the PBC's donor mobilization capacity is critical for addressing the resource gaps. PBC's reorientation and readjustment of its projects are also encouraging. As the Assistant Secretary General, Mr. Taranko, has said, it's important that the Peace Building Commission is able to use the previous experiences of mission transition to create the strategic space for transition in Guinea-Bissau. In view of the imminent drawdown and the pandemic, it is more important than ever before that the international community accompanies Guinea-Bissau in their efforts to sustaining peace and ensuring the political stability. In this regard, importance of the Conakry Agreement and the ECOWAS roadmap hold the key. On our part, we will continue to extend our support to the Guinea-Bissau Confederation in their endeavors to sustainable peace in the country. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much to the representative of Bangladesh for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Canada.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for convening us this morning. And thank you as well to our briefers, SRSG, Sori Coulibaly, Ambassadors De Silva and Abari, and Mr. Fernandez Taranko. Thank you all. My delegation also takes this opportunity to thank Ambassador De Silva for the close collaboration between our permanent missions during his tenure, and to wish him all the very best in his next and his future endeavors. Mr. Chairman, the meeting today is an opportunity to build upon the PBC's meetings in April, specifically that of the April 8th on the impact of COVID-19 on peace building and sustaining peace, and on April 22nd regarding COVID-19 in West Africa and the Sahel. Canada welcomes the focus of the configuration today on these challenges specific to Guinea-Bissau. In the context of the ongoing political volatility and gaps in governing capacity, the government of Guinea-Bissau needs our support to address the COVID-19 crisis. For its part, Canada is partnering with UNDP and government institutions to strengthen the COVID-19 epidemiological surveillance system in Guinea-Bissau. This partnership is particularly important given the impact of COVID-19 on the leadership of the country. We wish those affected by COVID-19 a speedy and full recovery, including and especially members of the new government. COVID-19 is not a gender-neutral crisis, Mr. Chairman. The trends that we have been seeing are troubling. The exacerbation of existing gender inequalities, increased rates of domestic violence, militarized responses to the crisis, putting human rights defenders at risk, and the absence of women in senior leadership and decision-making roles. And this is a global trend. Health crises amplify existing inequalities, including gender inequality, and are further complicated by conflict and instability. Responding to these crises requires a contextualized response that meets the needs of local populations and addresses COVID-19 through a human security and intersectional gendered lens. And in the context of COVID-19 and political volatility, it is important that the PBC renew its efforts to strengthen the rule of law in Guinea-Bissau to counter the influence of transnational organized crime. We are also concerned about the reports of physical intimidation of elected representatives in the context of the ongoing political dispute. With regard to socioeconomic development, Mr. Chairman, no doubt you and members here are aware of the deep commitment held by my PR and my government in terms of financing for development, accessing private sector resources, and breaking down silos to focus on the elimination of inequalities, the economic and social inequalities that are drivers of conflict. As we meet here this morning, Minister Champagne, Ambassador Blanchard, and Jamaican counterparts are convening a soft launch of financing for development work streams created by the 28th of May leaders level meeting on Building Back Better. These efforts will be relevant to Guinea-Bissau and to West Africa more generally, and Canada will ensure that the PBC and its configurations are integrated into that work. Canada strongly supports the idea of promoting the role of women and youth in political and peace-building efforts. In particular, it's important to support initiatives that strengthen civil society and bridge the gap between government and civil society. Canada supported a WPS project with an NGO in Guinea-Bissau, which was recently implemented. And Canada is using WPS agenda as a framework to respond to COVID-19, prioritizing a gendered response. We know that we will only make our way out of this crisis by responding to the needs of all people, including women and girls, in all of their diversity. The African Union has developed an extensive and progressive body of legal and policy instruments to promote gender equality and women's human rights, and has increased its leadership on WPS, including through its Office of the Special Envoy on WPS and the African Network of Women in Conflict Prevention and Peace Mediation, FEMWISE. Now, Canada supports these African efforts to advance WPS, including through financial assistance and political initiatives. For instance, during the African Union Summit in February, Prime Minister Trudeau announced a $10 million contribution to the AU Commission to support gender equality and women's empowerment. We will continue to work with partners on the continent to ensure further engagement of women in governance and peace building in Guinea-Bissau. In closing, Mr. Chairman, my delegation would like to thank you for your personal commitment to this configuration, including your recent engagement with the World Bank, as well as the efforts of SRSG Sori Coulibaly and her office. Thank you both.
Thank you very much to the distinguished representative of Canada, and thank you for raising the issue of the financing for development, which Canada and Jamaica have been spearheading to great effect. Unfortunately, not even the magic of modern technology allowed me to be in both places at once. So I had to prioritize here. Moving on now, I give the floor to the distinguished Deputy Permanent Representative of Guatemala, Minister Omar Castañeda Solares.
Thank you very much, dear Ambassador Ronaldo Costafilo. We're very grateful for this meeting and for your strong commitment as chair of the PBC configuration of Guinea-Bissau. Certainly, we commend all the different efforts that you are doing, and also we want to thank you very much, all the briefers, Ambassador, also the permanent representative of Guinea-Bissau, in terms of the information has been provided. We do believe, as a country, that in this context, the PBC is creating this strong platform for a better, coherent, and coordinated support, including with financial institutions in relation with strengthening the priorities of Guinea-Bissau in this current situation. We also want to thank for all the information provided and believe that it is need to continue strengthening national institutions in the context of the current political situation. And certainly it is quite important to take advantage as well of the previous agreements, the very important agreement of Conakry, and also strengthen the relation with ECOWAS and follow up all the different recommendations in terms of strengthening the institutionality of Guinea-Bissau. Again, many thanks, dear Ambassador. Thank you for convening this meeting, and also you can count with our support to continue working with you as chair of this important configuration. Again, thank you. Muchas gracias. Obrigado.
Gracias a usted. Thank you to the distinguished Deputy Permanent Representative of Guatemala. And now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I've divided my statement into three parts: peace-building priorities, international support, and political will. To begin with the peace-building priorities. First, Guinea-Bissau must not slide further into instability. It must appoint a prime minister and a government in keeping with the results of the legislative elections of 2019 and its constitution. Its politicians, military, and security forces must respect the rule of law, must stop sponsoring hatred and violence, and must prevent known drug traffickers from operating with impunity. Second, Guinea-Bissau must resolve its institutional political instability by implementing the urgent reforms as per the ECOWAS roadmap and the Conakry Agreement, in particular, the review of its constitution. Third, in order to achieve long-term peace and stability, Guinea-Bissau must recognize that drug trafficking through its borders is a key driver of poor governance, instability, and stunted development prospects, which can only be resolved through a genuine and inclusive national dialogue of all political leaders and the military, as well as civil society actors. So, how can the international community support these priorities? First, international support should be aligned to and conditional on the urgent reforms I and other delegates have mentioned, and channeled through the high-level platform which the UN Special Representative is setting up to accompany the reform agenda. The Peacebuilding Commission can help by channeling funding from member states and the international financial institutions into the UN's Sustainable Development Cooperation Framework for Guinea-Bissau. With UNIOGBIS due to leave the country at the end of this year, UN agencies, in particular the UN Country Team and UNODC, will also need to strengthen their capacity in order to take the strain from UNIOGBIS. Finally, political will. As has been mentioned, none of these reforms will be possible without the political will to implement them. And respectfully here, I must disagree with earlier comments regarding the impartiality of the Bissau-Ghanaian Defense and Security Forces. Since the presidential election, these forces have blatantly interfered in politics in support of Embalo by occupying state institutions, including the Supreme Court of Justice, thereby disrupting the legal challenge to the electoral results, and the People's National Assembly building, preventing parliamentarians from entering. Furthermore, opposition and independent-minded MPs, including recently Marciano Indi and Armando Diaz, plus judges and journalists have been subject to violence and intimidation. Finally, the convicted serious drug trafficking offender, Brahma Saidiba, has returned to Bissau, but is not serving his sentence. The message this sends to the outside world is that the President and Prime Minister, supported by the military elite, are protecting a major drug trafficker. This is why I'd like to use this opportunity to call upon the Bissau Ghanaian authorities, government, military and security forces to put the people of Guinea-Bissau first, refrain from violence and intimidation, and get on with the important work of implementing the urgent reforms. And also to call upon the international community, in particular the Group of Five, plus the regional states, to support those who seek to implement these reforms and to hold to account those who seek to undermine peace and stability in Guinea-Bissau. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank the distinguished representative of the United Kingdom for his statement, and now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the European Union.
Muito obrigada, Sr. Presidente. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. We very much welcome the PBC's continued interest and commitment to assisting in overcoming the challenging situation in Guinea-Bissau. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and on this I echo the distinguished Ambassador of Japan for your initiative to have the DPPA providing a written update to the members of this configuration on the ongoing situation. I would also like to thank all the briefers for your updated insights and continued engagement with Guinea-Bissau. The EU as well remains engaged, in particular within the Group of Five, the African Union, the Community of Portuguese-speaking countries, the Economic Community of Western African countries, the European Union, and the United Nations towards resolving the political and institutional crisis. In this regard, like others have stressed, it is crucial that all actors respect the ECOWAS decision and work within the constitutional framework, including by appointing a prime minister and forming a government, in full compliance with the provisions of the Constitution and in conformity with the results of the legislative elections of March 2019. COVID-19 should not be taken as an excuse to further limit democratic space and escape these decisions. We also encourage UNIOGBIS and the SRSG to continue to work closely with ECOWAS to support the regional organization's mediation efforts, as the EU is already doing. While noting the current challenging circumstances, we welcome the continued updates in terms of the SRSG and UNIOGBIS ongoing consultation with national authorities on the transition planning. We also welcome your views, Mr. Chair, on how the PBC can assist UNIOGBIS in this full-scale transition planning and implementation. You can count on our continued engagement at this level as well. One last point on the COVID-19 response efforts, to inform you that we are finalizing different contracts that will enable improvements in 3 hospitals, including at the Simão Mendes National Hospital, training of human resources for health on intensive care, and capacitating local institutions to produce hand rub solution. Other initiatives under the Team Europe response are also being considered. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to the distinguished representative of the European Union, and thank you for the information on cooperation being provided. It's always useful for the configuration to know. Now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Germany.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for convening this meeting, and thanks a lot to the other speakers, and in particular to SRSG, Ms. Zoe Coulibaly, for her very comprehensive and concise presentation of the situation in Guinea-Bissau. It is quite disappointing that after the very encouraging and peaceful presidential elections in Guinea-Bissau, the political crisis continues. It is now crucial to form a government in accordance with the constitution in order to bring political stability to the country. Successful peace building, socioeconomic developments, the fight against COVID-19, to all of these immense challenges, there's one precondition, and that is political stability. And while this is first and foremost the responsibility of the national decision makers, we need to uphold the international attentions and urge all stakeholders in Guinea-Bissau to act responsibly. Germany is deeply worried about certain disturbing events in Guinea-Bissau, including reports of violence and threats against political actors, the lack of neutrality of the military with its occupation of state institutions, and there are even indications of alleged involvement of political and military personnel in drug trafficking and organized crime, which, despite the huge gains that have been achieved, that have been mentioned before, remain a serious threat not only to Guinea-Bissau, but to the whole region. These are unacceptable developments that the international community and Guinea-Bissau's partners must address, and it is important to find clear language in this regard. The engagement of the PBC, as well as the work of UNIOCBIS and other UN entities, remain crucial, especially in the process of transition. We need a strengthened role of other UN actors like the UN country team, UNIVAS, or UNODC. It is important that UN entities on the ground continue to closely work with national and regional partners, especially with ECOWAS, and coordinate their efforts. And in this regard, we want to commend the continued engagement by ECOWAS and its important role in promoting stability and peaceful solutions to political disputes. And finally, as informal coordinator between the PBC and the Security Council, Germany highly appreciates the recommendations and assessments the PBC has provided in the past. And we encourage all sides to continue to strengthen this cooperation between the PBC and the Security Council. And thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for your particular engagement here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to the distinguished representative of Germany, and I take note and endorse her final comments on the PBC providing advice to the Security Council. I think this is essential to ensure that the PBC plays its role to the full. Now, I have exhausted my list of speakers. I don't know if anybody else would like to take the floor. I could use that famous citation from a wedding ceremony. It says, "Speak now or forever hold your peace." I see no more requests for the floor. If that is the case, then I will move on to some brief concluding remarks. And initially, of course, I would like to thank, on behalf of all the members of the configuration here today, all our briefers for the very valuable and important statements and information they have brought to us today. I'm also grateful to all of the members of the configuration for their feedback, their comments, and the ideas they have presented here today. Now, one first point that strikes me from the discussion is that, and several members mentioned this, but I'd highlight in particular Ambassador Omar Hilal, who highlight the particularly challenging scenario that confronts us, in that the cornerstone of any program of assistance, and peace-building assistance is no exception, is the concept of national ownership. And I think, as I said, a number of members highlighted this. And on the flip side of that, SRSG, Sohi Coulibaly, recalled to us the very challenging fact that the political uncertainties in Guinea-Bissau make the concept of national ownership a very daunting hurdle for us to face. But I think it's one that we must all jointly overcome. Looking forward, let me highlight a few points based on the observations and comments presented today by both briefers and members of the configuration. Firstly, I call once again on all the political actors in Guinea-Bissau to solve the differences through dialogue, to follow the constitution, and to show utmost restraint, preserving peace and stability in the country. I also commend the role played by UNIOCBIS and the organizations of the P5 group in exercising good offices and facilitating inclusive political dialogue. In the context of the UN transition, I reiterate the Peace-Building Commission's willingness to continue working to ensure system-wide coherence between UNIOCBIS, the country team, and all relevant international and regional actors. The shared expectation in this room, and I use the word room with a degree of latitude, seems to be that the PBC continue to play its unique role in helping to mobilize international and regional support for Guinea-Bissau's socio-economic development and other peace-building priorities, including in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. Our attention to economic revitalization and the country's cooperation with international financial institutions will be of particular relevance in the coming months. I take that the members of the configuration also recognize and value the important role played by the Peace-Building Fund in Guinea-Bissau, especially through projects aimed at dialogue on reforms, empowering women, fostering meaningful engagement with youth, and promoting reconciliation and conflict resolution. I once again thank the government of Guinea-Bissau here today through Ambassador Fernando Delfim and the members of the configuration for the continued engagement in our activities. I also reiterate our appreciation for the excellent cooperation we have been receiving from SRSG Sorie Coulibaly and the UNIOGBIS team. Finally, I thank the UN system, particularly DPPA and PBSO, for their valuable support. Having said this, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all very much once again.